Okay. Are you still letting people in, Haya?
I am, David, but I think you can start.
Okay. Well, welcome everyone to the JCPA Delegate Assembly meeting. We're pleased that so many of you, both lay and professional, are participating in today's proceedings. We'd hope that we would not still in the midst of the pandemic, but almost 2 years later, here we are. It's still impacting our lives and society. We're lucky that we're able to convene virtually. I am hoping that later this year, we may be able to convene in person. Before we welcome our first speaker, let's review some house rules. Please write your name and community in your Zoom box. Keep your microphone on mute unless you're called on to speak. If you have a question, put it in a private chat to Tammy Gilden, and she will convey the question. Feel free to engage in chat during the program. However, it should be used for sharing ideas. It's not a place to analyze or call out points you don't personally agree with. We have a great program today. We'll hear from the esteemed Stephen Mueller, who is the father of community relations in many ways, and who regularly analyzes the state of Jewish life in America through a community relations lens. We will then discuss legislative priorities during the 2022 Congress, congressional meetings, and we'll hear from several of our national partners and share with you JCPA's priorities so that we can all work strategically together. I want to thank everyone that has participated in a local and national policy setting process. Our third program will be a discussion on implementing JCPA's racial justice platform, which was adopted last January. We'll hear the challenges, hear about the challenges we're facing and best practices from several JCRCs and the RAC. I'm now going to call on JCPA board member Susan Abravanel to introduce our first speaker. Susan?
Thank you so much, David, and welcome to everyone. Dr. Stephen Mueller, considered, as David noted, by many of us to be the preeminent guide in Jewish communal relations, is an emeritus professor of Jewish communal service at the Jcrc campus of Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion in Los Angeles. Prior to his academic appointment, Mueller served the Jewish community in a series of executive roles. Trained as a political scientist, he has authored 5 books and numerous articles, including classic texts in the field, many which were outcomes of his research in communal trends, Jewish political behavior, and American anti-Semitism. Currently, he consults for a number of foundations, public policy organizations, and national Jewish organizations. He has just completed editing a volume for USC's Kasdan Institute entitled The Impact of the Presidency of Donald Trump on American Jewry and Israel. You can see the link to the book in the chat, and also I believe it was sent to you in your notes prior to this meeting. The book unpacks the impact of the Trump presidency on American Jews and Israel, and is, of course, very timely. It is our special pleasure to welcome him to present to us today. Please note that unfortunately, because of the time constraints on our program, as you were informed, it's quite lengthy. We will not be able to hold a Q&A session following Steve's presentation. After this session, however, we will share his remarks and contact information with you. Steve.
Well, thank you, Susan and David, as well as my appreciation to Melanie and to Haya. I would invite Haya to bring up my PowerPoint at this time so that we may begin our conversation together. As I point out, this is indeed a new moment in time. We find ourselves in a very different place as a community and as a nation. The construct of our society is undergoing major disruptions as we witness the undoing of our communal order, as well as the threats to the very fabric of our democracy. The next slide, please. The next slide would be helpful. We are experiencing a significant generational transformation as we move from a deeply embedded communal model to a highly individualized framework. Inside of our communities, we are living with the emergence of privatized Judaism, a highly personalized set of expressions supported by social media. Much of our communal religious and educational experience is totally virtually based. More Jews than at any time in our history are unaffiliated religiously and institutionally. Nearly 1/3 of younger Jews describe themselves as religious nuns. In this environment, Israel, for many in our community, is understood to be judged without favor. Absent now is a personalized or organic relationship to the Jewish state that had defined earlier generations. As the Pew studies also suggest, Jews remain deeply embedded as liberal activists, caring about the welfare of the society, even as they become acutely aware of anti-Semitic trends and experience other challenges to their liberal inclinations. Yet at the same time, we are in the process of becoming multiple communities. As a communal system, we have moved from a place of consensus to a cauldron of division, even discord. The divisions we identified are centered around competing generational perspectives, a growing diversity comprised of Jews by choice and Jews of color, as well as the deep and abiding political differences that separate us. Yet, what still binds us is an extraordinary sense of Jewish pride as expressed by the behaviors and beliefs of Jews in connection with such historic symbols as the Holocaust and our continued engagement with Jewish culture. Anti-Semitic attacks and anti-Israel rhetoric bind us together, even as we hold different perspectives. The next slide, please. The mega issues cascading about us include the question of whiteness, historical and institutional racism, and the legitimacy of our very democracy. Over the past 6 decades, Jews both embraced American exceptionalism and were its beneficiaries. Today, the very idea of exceptionalism is being challenged. Political scientist Samuel P. Huntington identified what this democracy experiences, which is a series of disruptive cycles, generally occurring every 60 years. The common features to these patterns include a loss of trust in institutions and a contempt for established elites. Indignation, anger, and resignation are themes that define the body politic, according to Huntington. The next slide, please. We need to both understand and respond to the dramatic demographic changes now underway in reshaping American society, its social beliefs, and its cultural mores. In this context, we're encountering divisions over race, culture, and politics, conspiratorial beliefs, and even the value of truth. We are experiencing for the first time in our lifetime a state of political dysfunctionality. In broad terms, Tom Nichols in 2017's book, The Death of Expertise, portrays the assault on truth and the evolution of alternative facts as distinguishing features to our current crises. Democracies, as we know, can only thrive if we are able to embrace essential truths and create a shared vision. The next slide, please. My recently released volume on Donald Trump points to how his presidency activated American Jewry, not only as voters, but as donors, as candidates representing those who both opposed 45, as well as Jewish Americans who embraced his politics. This political moment reminds us of how deeply embedded American Jews are in preserving and growing this democracy, even as they disagree. Yet against the backdrop of this period, we are encountering a new political war directed against us. As Jews, we are being identified as globalists and Zionists. The next slide, please. The assault, which was launched from the right, but now has its adherents from a number of other sources, both political and religious, view us in particular as white, liberal, and Zionists. These credentials for them are highly problematic. As we know from our past, there has been and currently are political actors and religious zealots seeking basically to eliminate or certainly to marginalize us as inauthentic political players. Our enemies do not distinguish our political credentials or religious labels. We must take note of Timothy Snyder's work on tyranny, where he draws numerous parallels between the rise of Donald Trump and the emergence of Nazism and fascism without equating this moment to 1933. We remind ourselves that the community relations movement itself emerged from the politics of hate that our community experienced at the beginning of the 20th century. The next slide, please. In thinking about the challenges and issues before us, our focus alone should not be set exclusively on problem solving, but rather in building a generative vision for our community and beyond. Over time, I have written extensively about the various phases of growing and framing our community relations enterprise. And in many ways, our community is still embracing a 19th century institutional model, at times dealing with a 20th century agenda, yet having to serve a 21st century demographic. We must seriously ask, are our organizations relevant? Are their messages coherent? And are our leaders credible, transparent, and inclusive? The next slide, please. I am outlining here a number of particular observations and next steps. First, the age of territorial Judaism, with its emphasis on unilateralism, competition, denominationalism, and institutional ownership, has passed from the scene. We are well launched into a period of collaborative engagement and partnership. Funders understand this. Indeed, we are inheriting a generation who neither appreciate or accept the silo mentality that defined a prior era in Jewish communal practice. Secondly, technology and technological innovation will drive this century. Managing the social media platforms and the other innovative technologies will shape our public policy options, our advocacy and organizing efforts, and produce alternative forms, even of religious expression and of communal engagement. Third, a radical shift is taking place within our communities in connection with financial resource development, as community and family foundations, along with private donor funds, are today reshaping Jewish philanthropic giving. If we believe there is a level of value added in connection with the work of community relations, we will need to plan as we will require generalists skilled in marshaling the resources to represent our communities at the multiple tables at which we must hold space. We will likewise require a cadre of dedicated experts in mastering social media technology, monitoring extremist movements, managing our community organizing strategies, and in understanding Jewish political trends. Further, we will require a whole new generation of community activists. Next, according to the Jewish communal stage, today there are numerous organizations focusing on specific community-based issues, targeting particular audiences, building networks of relationships. Critical to the welfare of our community will be the effort on our part to network with these voices. The next slide, please. In 2018, in an article on the state of the field, I laid out a detailed strategy essential for us in moving forward. Here are a few primary conclusions drawn from both that document and beyond. Essential conversations involve tackling the difficult and divisive concerns we are facing. We need to construct a series of on-the-ground discussions centered on the primary issues critical to our community and the larger society. These facilitated conversations need to take place around the dangers of our political divide, the Israel diaspora relationship, and even the denominational divisions that today separate us as American Jews. Second, but just as we strategize on the communal level, we must also retool nationally with the establishment of a Jewish public policy think tank that can analyze social patterns, political trends, and community organizing methodologies. Third, we need to develop virtual educational programs similar to America at the Crossroads, created by two grassroots organizations here in Los Angeles. This would be essential as this online initiative draws in excess of 5,000 participants from across the country for its weekly 1-hour conversations involving prominent newsmakers, authors, academics, and analysts as they explore the issues central to our democracy. This might well be the role for Jcpa to perform in partnership with other institutions. The roadway forward is a mapping initiative that communities ought to consider. First, by identifying existing and emerging Jewish civic efforts and their primary actors, in addition to cataloging the broad community's ethnic, religious, and racial organizing infrastructures. With whom ought we to be in conversation? Who are the emerging political voices in our own communities? And how do we best engage them? In fact, how well do we organize in order to meet these different and new challenges? The community relations enterprise must be seated in the world of Jewish learning, as there is a natural and essential partnership with such institutions as Hartman, Pardes, and others in embedding the work being done in public policy and social justice with Jewish texts and historic context. Even as we find ourselves today in some measure paralyzed by the internal Jewish wars, we need to remind our detractors and our allies of the essential importance of a Jewish voice of conscience. Absent a coordinated and engaged Jewish presence, our community will most certainly lose credibility and access. I hold to the premise that devoid of a formal Jewish political presence, the well-being of our community will be compromised. Since this republic's inception, Jews have sought to be part of the political equation, not only in defense of their self-interests, but in advancing a broader civic agenda. We are more than an ethnic community seeking its place at the table. We are the inheritors of a great tradition of law and justice, culture, and community. The next slide, please. We were made for this moment, even as we encounter new external threats and learn to manage the wars amongst us. We find ourselves as part of the fourth American Jewish generation, facing a major demographic transformation. We would have to ask ourselves, can a people whose history was marked by the absence of power fully appreciate and benefit from the uses of power now that it is ours to facilitate? Against the backdrop of all of these transformative elements and the swirling challenges facing us, we would remind ourselves of Abraham Joshua Heschel's imperative. We own the past and are hence not afraid of what it is to be. We are summoned and cannot forget it. Winding the clock of eternal history, we are God's stake in human history. The greatest sin for a Jew is to forget what he represents. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Steve. There's so much in what you've said, and I have just put into the chat that we will be able to have copies of your presentation and contact information for you following the slide so that we can all digest it and begin the very significant work that lies ahead of us. Thank you for your guidance. It was really wonderful. I'm now going to turn this over to my colleague, Corey Shapiro, who will begin the discussion of the 2022 JCPA National Policy Priorities.
Hi, everyone. I'm Corey Shapiro. I'm a JCPA board member and the co-chair of the Policy Advisory Committee. Thank you all for being here. We are excited to go over our policy priority document for this legislative year. And we have some speakers talk about what they are doing in their with their organizations. As many of you know, we work with national organizations. And so the JCPA Policy Advisory Committee met in January to set our federal policy priorities for 2022. We had sent a policy survey to all the JCRCs and the national agencies to determine what their organizations and their communities' priorities are related to JCPA issues and what they recommend to us for our priority concerns. The result was overwhelming to stay the course that we had already set for our 2021 priorities. In addition, we reviewed the priorities of our main interfaith and civil rights coalitions and noted we have no new resolutions for this year. As many of you know who are members of the Delegates Assembly, we use this group to introduce, debate, and eventually vote on new resolutions for JCPA to add to our policy compendium. This year, as I mentioned, we have no new resolutions. The following priorities that we have agreed to, and I think Haya is going to be either sharing the screen or putting a link so that you all can follow along at your own pace. So this is the first page of it, and there's a link in the chat to the actual the full document in case you want to go on your own. So we aim, as we sort of mentioned, this first page lays out our introduction and sort of what our mission is for those of you who are unfamiliar with the work that we do, and the second paragraph is really highlighting the overall work and the mission, which is to combat anti-Semitism, racism, and hate, support peace and security in Israel, and to advocate for human rights around the world. And so if you can go to the next slide, Haya, and we will have a description of the first tier of the two tiers of priorities. In the first tier, which is our legislative priorities, and those are the issues that we believe are going to be led by JCPA in our Jewish community, and in which we intend to lead the Jewish community, and our staff is going to be doing that work with our coalition partners and with all of you. So we have anti-Semitism and hate, combating anti-Semitism and hate in all its forms, democracy and voting rights, to strengthen our democratic institutions, extend representation, and expand access to the ballot box. And we see that come up in different legislative items that may or may not be successful, and we're hopeful that we can at least have some impact on pushing those forward. Criminal justice reform, which has been a critical priority for our organization, and there's been such great work done by the folks at JCPA on this, which is ending mass incarceration and its disproportionate impact on people and communities of color, and reorient the criminal legal system to reflect a rehabilitative and restorative justice approach to public safety. And finally, racial justice, implementing JCPA's racial justice platform, which you're going to hear about a little bit later in our agenda, that aims to end systemic racism and racial disparities in America and seek equity and ensure the safety and security for all people in the US. And these are our second tier priorities, which are policy issues that JCPA will work on. We have great coalition partners in the Jewish community and in the general nonprofit world that we will work with and support those organizations, but we probably won't be able to take the lead given our staffing issues and our resources, but they still remain important to the organization. On the domestic front, we have immigration, poverty and the social safety net, COVID-19 recovery, environmental and climate justice, reproductive care and women's rights. And on the international context, in the international space, we have obviously Israel and international human rights. And our policies, that we have remain flexible and responsive so that we can be responsive to current events and crisis as needed. And so what I'd like to do now is call on some of those organizational partners to talk about what areas they are going to be prioritizing in their work as organizational partners in our work. So today we have from the Orthodox Union, Nathan Diamond, from NCJW, Faith Williams, from ADL, Chelsea Parsons, from JFNA, Darcy Hirsch, and from the RAC, Barbara Weinstein. And I think we're going to start with Nathan. If you can go first and give us an overview of what you all will be working on this year.
Sure. Thank you very much, Corey. Good afternoon. Pleasure to be with you all remotely, but it gives a chance for everybody to gather together. I particularly appreciate those of you who have lovely warm weather scenes in your backgrounds. On behalf of the Orthodox Union, I actually would first highlight a couple of key points that are priorities for us, that have been priorities for us in this past year or two and are aligned very well, overlap very well with what's on JCPA's agenda. I won't go into them in detail, but even before last week's terrible incident in Colleyville, Texas, security for synagogues and day schools and the Jewish community more broadly is a high priority for the Orthodox Union. And we've worked in partnership with many national agencies and local communities on that. And part of that is something on your agenda, the Domestic Terrorism Prevention Act. That is something we're also working on and hoping will pass Congress. And similarly, I think we're all in the same place on trying to get State Department nominee Deborah Lipstadt confirmed, to get her a hearing, which will then hopefully lead to her confirmation very soon, so she can get to work together with Aaron Kayak and others at State on combating anti-Semitism abroad. Interlinked into there, of course, as a priority for us is the Nonprofit Security Grant Program and getting that funded. And already a couple years ago, we, along with partners like JFNA and others, and allies in Congress, were pressing for that to have its funding level increased to $360 million, doubling what it's been for the past handful of years. And that's something we're pushing on very hard right now. There are bipartisan dear colleague letters circulating in both the House and Senate on that right now. And for what it's worth, I would say I'm actually cautiously optimistic we're going to get that done. It doesn't hurt that Chuck Schumer is a champion of that for us, and he also happens to be the Senate Majority Leader. But that's a key focus for us now. And alongside that, we've been working with some congressional allies to also try to have some additional resources that the federal government provides through Justice Department grant programs to local police departments, to have some of those many millions of dollars specifically earmarked to support local law enforcement agencies providing more patrols and protection to synagogues, but houses of worship and other faith-based institutions generally. One of the things we've seen, again, not unique to the Jewish community alone, but to other faith communities as well, is that it has been the case that when a local synagogue or a mosque or a church reaches out to their local police department and asks for increased presence, that they're often told by the local police, well, we just don't have the resources for that. So what ends up happening is you need the NSGP, or you need to find money to pay out of pocket to hire private security or to hire an off-duty policeman. And again, the Justice Department already gives out many millions of dollars to local police for various purposes. And we're in conversation with DOJ and some folks on the Hill about having some of that bolster greater security at our community institutions. Very briefly, beyond the area of security, perhaps on a lighter note, if you will, while Build Back Better is dead, we were very focused on an aspect of it, particularly with regard to the expansion of support for early childcare and universal pre-K education. And that's something that there are discussions on the Hill and elsewhere about trying to move something on that forward, even if the larger Build Back Better package is dead. And so that's something we'll be engaging on, very important to the community and others beyond the Jewish community as well. And also we're still working on, this is not on the legislative agenda, we succeeded thankfully in the infrastructure package in having a new grant program created under which the Energy Department is going to make grants to nonprofits to help them make their buildings more energy efficient. And we're going to be working, we are working with the executive branch on the implementation of that program. And hopefully that will be rolling out in the next few months. And those Jewish nonprofits and other nonprofits that want to avail themselves of those resources to both make, to help with their bottom line, to also help with their environmental impact, making their buildings more energy efficient is a priority for us in the next few months as well. Again, going back to some points that were touched on in the broader agenda, obviously we're engaged on supporting the security and welfare of Israel and a strong U.S.-Israel relationship, and are watching very carefully the developments with regard to negotiations with Iran. And when we have nothing better to do, we look over and see what mischief is happening at the United Nations. So we enjoy our partnerships with the other national agencies. We appreciate our partnership with Jcpa and with the local JCRCs around the country as appropriate. And I thank you for inviting me to share the OU's priority agenda with you.
Thank you so much, Nathan, and I'll turn it over to Faith with the NCJW.
Thanks so much, Corey. Hi all, Faith Williams, National Council of Jewish Women. My pronouns are she, her. I'm the Associate Director of Government Relations and Advocacy, and I appreciate Jcpa giving us a moment or two to share our priorities coming up for the next year. I'm going to share my screen briefly. Okay, that should do it. Hopefully, oh, there we go. So just to start with sort of a high-level overview, National Council of Jewish Women, we have 3 policy priorities. The first is reproductive health rights and justice. Excuse me. The second is voting rights. And the third is judicial nominations. So what do we mean when we talk about these 3 buckets? So let's take the first one, reproductive health rights and justice. We advocate for every person to have the freedom to make their own moral and faith-informed decisions about their body, health, and future. As I'm sure many of you know, this could be and likely will be the year that the last vestiges of the legal protections granted by Roe v. Wade that they exist. There's a Supreme Court case. We'll get a decision probably in June that will likely negate what's left of Roe. So then we'll be kind of operating in this, I don't want to say new because everything old is new again space, but working to figure that out. So what are we doing within that space? So for one thing, NCJW launched its 73 Forward campaign, which is about explaining the Jewish case for reproductive health rights and justice. Our Repro Shabbat is happening this weekend. You might have seen it on social media. And in terms of our policy goals, there's a long list here. It's incomplete, but I'll just highlight 2. The first is the Women's Health Protection Act, which would grant providers the right to administer abortion care and patients the right to receive that care. It is, my cat wants to get involved. It is a proactive visionary bill. And then the other bill I want to highlight is the EACH Act, which looks at funding for abortion care, because the right to care doesn't mean all that much if you're unable to afford that care. So that's what we're working on in this space. Next one, voting rights. NCJW works to ensure that every eligible person can cast a ballot and have their vote counted. As you heard from Corey, this is certainly something we work very closely with Jcpa on. 3 bills in particular, we're focused on the Freedom to Vote Act, which is a whole slate of democracy reform provisions, things like ending partisan gerrymandering, making Election Day a holiday, protecting our access to the polls. The John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, which would strengthen and renew the 1965 Voting Rights Act, and finally DC statehood, which would grant voting representation to the District of Columbia. And it's worth noting, in particular, these first 2 bills were recently kind of smushed together into one for last week's push on voting rights. So I'm not totally sure, in the next few months, will they stay one bill? Will they advance as 2 separate bills? Will they be broken into smaller pieces? We don't know, but the provisions in them are what we are supporting. Last but not least, our work on judicial nominations. We urge the Senate to confirm fair, independent, qualified, and diverse judges to the federal judiciary. As I'm sure you all know, judges are nominated and confirmed by the Senate for lifetime appointments on the bench. So it's really important that those judges are qualified, diverse, they reflect the communities they serve, etc. So here are 4 folks that we're currently working on, advocating for them to be confirmed. I won't kind of go through them all, but they across the board, have backgrounds that are pro-voting rights, pro-reproductive rights, workers' rights, excuse me. So that is our work on judicial nominations. And then similarly to, again, what Corey shared, NCJW works on a number of other policy portfolios. We certainly do not have time to dive into all of them, and they are not our priority policy portfolios, but I just wanted to give you all a taste of some of the other work that we do. So with that, I'll stop sharing and pass it back to Corey. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Faith. I'd be remiss if I didn't say Dale Ho is a brilliant person who I have the opportunity to work closely with, and just have the most admiration for him. Next is Chelsea Parsons with the ADL, and Chelsea, please take it away. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. It's great to be here. And of course, as it usually works in our work from home environment, right as this meeting started, I have leaf blowers and people on my roof right above my head. So I'm hoping that it doesn't impact your ability to hear me, but we're gonna play through. So I'm going to go quickly through 5 categories of ADL's federal domestic policy priorities for this year. Lots of overlap with what we've already heard, lots of overlap with JCPA priorities. The first category is combating domestic extremism. That is a core piece of ADL's ongoing work. And the core legislative ask that we're continuing to advocate for is for the passage of the Domestic Terrorism Prevention Act, working with many of you and many other organizations to continue to advocate for that legislation. The second bucket is protecting the Jewish community. This work is obviously of heightened urgency after the tragedy of last weekend. So we are also engaged in efforts to increase funding for the Nonprofit Security Grant Program to support Deborah Lipstadt's nomination. Again, working in partnership with many of you on those priorities as well. The third category of work is curbing the spread of hate online and the role of social media platforms in allowing hate, violent extremism, and disinformation to proliferate online. So doing a lot of work on how to hold social media platforms accountable, what kind of federal reforms are necessary to really start to rein in the spread of hate and extremism online. The fourth category of work is really looking forward on work related to hate crimes. We were so fortunate to pass the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act last year, which included the Jabara Hire No Hate Act, which is something we had been advocating for a number of years. And so we're looking now to ensure appropriate and robust implementation of that law, while also looking at other areas of hate crime work that includes a focus on prevention, appropriate incident response, and then community restoration, all of which has a priority on improving hate crime data collection. We know that the hate crime data that the FBI is currently collecting and reporting out is tragically flawed. And so trying to be really innovative about how we can continue to improve the hate crime data collection program. And then the last bucket of work is, our work, we call it ensuring a just and inclusive society. And that's really where we focus on work related to voting rights. We were very engaged in the bills that Faith just mentioned last week. We're engaged at the state level, both in legislative fights as well as in some litigation, really trying to push back against voter suppression efforts and anti-voter efforts at the state level. And then we do a lot of work in partnership as well, focusing on areas related to immigration and refugee access. So those are just a couple of quick hits of the work that we're doing. And again, really happy to be here today. And they stopped leaf blowing. So I'm really feeling fortunate about that.
Thank you so much, Chelsea. Up next is Barbara Weinstein with the Religious Action Center. I believe.
Great, thanks so much, Corey. It's good to see everybody. I am also going to share my screen. And hold on. Here we go. You're seeing the back end, aren't you? Can you hear me?
But we don't actually see anything?
Can you hear me now? Yes, I see nodding heads. Okay, I'm going to try sharing one more time. Let's see how this goes. Better, thumbs up.
Excellent.
Fabulous, great, okay. So I just want to start off by saying most of the items I'll mention you can see on our website, rac.org, take-action. So feel free to click over there if anything grabs your interest. There's also a tremendous amount of overlap between the things that we're working on at the RAC and what all of my colleagues have talked about as well. So I'm going to skim over those. And finally, I put this in alphabetical order because I didn't want to suggest a prioritization, even though we do have those simply because of urgency of particular moments that we're in. But I figured alphabetizing was the most neutral way to share some of these priorities with you. So I am once again frozen, which is not great. There we go. Okay. Anti-Semitism, we heard about Deborah Lipstat's nomination, so I'm not going to go deeply into that, but I did want to also spotlight the Pray Safe Act. One of the sponsors, along with Senator Rob Portman of Ohio, is Jackie Rosen, near and dear to our community, and especially now, obviously, we're all at even greater concern about these issues, and this provides or would provide opportunities for our congregations and our institutions to access resources that would help them in this particular moment. I know also that disability rights are extremely important, certainly to our movement and so many others. Jewish Disability Advocacy Day is coming up in February. And again, we are working on the Able Age Adjustment Act, which expands the eligibility for accessing funds or saving funds that allow people to live with greater security as they need it. On the economic justice front, some of these you've also heard about from Faith and others. There's the Raise the Wage Act, which would hopefully finally bring the minimum wage up to a standard that reflects inflation and the need amongst our lowest paid workers. The Family Act, which would rectify the fact that the United States is the only comparable country that doesn't have a paid family or medical leave system. And the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act that would prevent discrimination against pregnant workers. So those are three of our economic justice priorities. And I also wanted to make sure that we mentioned gun violence prevention, which continues to plague our society so terribly. There's a few bills we're working on in that regard, but I wanted to lift up the Background Check Expansion Act, which would do what hopefully is a common sense, or we can all agree is a common sense step by expanding the background check process. On the immigration front, two efforts that we're working deeply on: the American Dream and Promise Act, which would impact primarily dreamers, those young people who were brought to this country undocumented and have grown up here and know no other country as home and now are at risk of deportation. And also temporary protective status, TPS holders, and deferred enforced departure holders. That bill was passed by the House. We're still waiting for Senate action. And that is definitely a priority of ours, along with the raising of the refugee admission ceiling. We obviously saw what can happen when presidential administrations change, and the previous administration implemented an abysmally low refugee admission ceiling. We don't want that to ever be able to happen again. So the GRACE Act would establish this kind of baseline level of 125,000 refugees annually. On Israel, there's a range of priorities, but I wanted to lift up these three: the Iron Dome supplemental, fulfilling commitments under the MOU that's in place right now, and of course, lifting up the importance of humanitarian aid to the Palestinians, which advances both US and Israeli interests in security and stability as well. LGBTQ plus issues, the Equality Act continues to be a priority for us, and ensuring that non-discrimination protections are in place for those in the LGBTQ plus community. Again, passed the House, still waiting for Senate action. And on racial justice, I know you're going to hear shortly from my colleague, our Director of Racial Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, Yolanda Savage-Narva, who will have a lot more to say on these topics, but I wanted to lift up the bill on reparations for African Americans. We have been adopted a resolution at the Reform Movement, at the URJ, a couple of years ago on this, and we are very much hoping that we'll see some legislative action on HR 40, which is literally just to study the issue of reparations. And so hopefully that will happen this year. And as you heard extensively already, we are also working on voting rights. And because the Freedom to Vote John Lewis bill did not move last week, we are doubling down on our nonpartisan civic engagement campaign, which is going to be a huge focus for us between now and November. And if we don't have these voting rights protections in place, then what we need to do is really ensure that everyone is able to freely and fairly cast their vote and have that vote counted. And so, as we have in the last several cycles, our congregations are going to be doing nonpartisan voter get out the vote work, or not get out the vote, but helping people register to vote, learn where to vote, how to vote, and particularly doing that with low propensity voters and partners in communities of color. So that, again, going to be a major focus for us over the coming months. And I won't go into depth on the issues around women. You heard about most of these, if not all of them, from Faith. But the Momnibus, which is probably one of my favorite bill names, and included in Build Back Better, which if that bill doesn't go, which looks increasingly less likely, we will hopefully see broken up into smaller pieces. The Each Act to repeal Hyde, especially timely on the anniversary of Roe. Paycheck fairness to close those loopholes in the Equal Pay Act, and finally reauthorizing and renewing the Violence Against Women Act. I've shared these slides with Haya, so she'll send them out. And again, you can go to rack.org/take-action and join us in raising your voice on any and all. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Barbara. And our last speaker is Darcy Hirsch with JFNA.
Thank you, Corey. Tough acts to follow. What could I possibly add? No, it's just really amazing how much we're all working on and how many coalition opportunities there are to raise our Jewish voices together and pursue this critical work. So JFNA's priorities for 2022 fall into 4 main buckets, much of which has already been discussed. Our first is Jewish communal security and support for Israel. Certainly, as Nathan mentioned, with the hostage crisis in Colleyville just over a week ago, the need for nonprofit security cannot be any more apparent. And we are advocating strongly to double the nonprofit security grant program from its current funding at 180 to 360. So we're working on that for the fiscal year 2022 and encouraging an omnibus bill before the government funding expires on February 18th. And we will also be pursuing that level of funding for 2023 when we get to that point. We're also advocating for $100 million for nonprofit security grant program to be included in whatever happens with the Build Back Better Act. It was included in the House passed version. And if the legislation is broken up into parts, we'll be advocating for that NSGB program to be funded in there as well. Certainly supporting a secure Israel. We're advocating in support of replenishing the Iron Dome program. We are pursuing the Israel Relations Normalization Act of 2021, joining with our partners to ensure that the Office of the Special Envoy is filled. And we're also working on implementation of the No Hate Act, which passed last year. I know Chelsea mentioned that. Our next big bucket is related to Jewish communal infrastructure. So, certainly our leadership on the Paycheck Protection Loan Program in 2020 benefited thousands of Jewish agencies and organizations. and the field is still struggling with the economic impact of the pandemic. So we're examining ways to help bolster our communal sector and ensure that they're able to support the community. So we're looking to reinstate the employee retention tax credit. We are pursuing various items related to charitable contributions and extending the deduction for non-itemizers. We're also pursuing legislation to incentivize hiring in the nonprofit sector, like Senator Klobuchar's Work Now Act. Our third main bucket is the health and human services. So we're supporting programs that alleviate poverty and promote economic mobility for low-income Jews and other communities. Certainly, we are advocating in support of our Holocaust Survivor Assistance Program, which brings down federal money to support Jewish family service agencies and federations, providing trauma-informed care for Holocaust survivors and other older adults who've experienced trauma. We are working on an initiative with Muslim partners to pursue more kosher and halal food in the federally funded TFAP program that goes to food pantries. We are working on the Better Care, Better Jobs Act, which would provide $250 billion for home and community-based services. Those are services that help support older adults and people with disabilities in their homes. That's also a component of the Build Back Better Act that we are continuing to advocate for. We're pursuing continuation of telehealth. So when the early healthcare crisis came about, we pursued flexibility so that Medicaid and Medicare would pay for telehealth because people could not leave their homes. And we're working to make sure that service is covered so that Jewish family service agencies and other medical providers can take care of people over telehealth. And as Nathan mentioned, we are pursuing a childcare program that was included in the Build Back Better Act that seems like it might have the option to move forward. And last, as far as that category goes, really pursuing the child tax credit and the earned income tax credit. The expansions that were included in the American Rescue Plan have helped millions of families, millions of children come out of poverty. Families are using these funds on rent, food, and medical bills, and those payments stopped. They expired on January 15th. And so we are advocating to extend those early payments and make sure that the families have the funds they need to support themselves. And the last bucket is related to human and civil rights, justice, and equity. I'll just say that we're looking to integrate a focus on equity, diversity, and inclusion throughout all of the public policy priorities that I just mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Darcy. And thank you to all of our speakers. We really appreciate hearing about the work you're doing in ways that we all can support that important work. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Leslie. But again, thank you all for hearing about our public policy priorities. And please be on the lookout for updates from JCPA on actions you all can take on these policy issues and promote in your community for your friends, colleagues, family members to take as well. So thank you very much. And Leslie, let's hear about our racial justice platform.
Thanks, Corey. Actually, I think first we have a video to share with all of you.
Hi, we can't hear any sound.
This may be the largest social movement in the history of the United States.
The Centers for Disease Control declared last week that racism is a serious public health threat in America.
This is a pandemic. It's a pandemic of hate. It's a pandemic of repression. It's a pandemic that seeks to infect American democracy.
We will be preparing resources for the field, reaffirming the JCPA's resolve, strengthening relationships with Black leaders, and creating an important new role for people of color within the JCPA network and as leaders within this important work on racial justice, both at the national and local levels.
Jcpa is developing a racial justice platform that will help us align with these agencies' priorities, enable us to partner on those issues in order to lessen racial disparities in our country.
You guys are from cities and states all over the country, and as much as we gather together to have that fight focused on Capitol Hill, the White House, and the various government agencies, whether it is legislation or regulation, we know that fight also has to happen at the state level. So making sure that we can come together in this federalist society and see to it that these particular pieces are put together at the ground, the policies of policing, the policies of economics, the policies of education, and so much more are fights we're going to have at both places.
And so for us, the way we address hate and bias, and you all know this well, right? You work on these issues and you have for years, is really not necessarily about prosecution, although that's one tool, but we actually have to reshape how we think about race in America. And we've never had a reckoning in this country with respect to truth telling and reconciliation, or, you know, sort of reformation or restorative justice.
DRT is mostly taught in graduate school and law school, in some cases undergrad, but it is not a curriculum. It's not a teaching methodology. It's generally not taught in K-12 schools. It's an attempt to restrict or prevent teachers from teaching about racism, sexism, and other forms of systemic oppression.
No one who is pushing critical race theory is to say to take anything from anybody. What they're saying is include and acknowledge my truth and my reality. Why do I have to convince people that me as a person of color, that I experience things different? Why is that something that, but we understand that's grounded in privilege. Because again, we live in typically a white-centric environment, and so folks of color, marginalized, you know, gender, all those identities have to convince those in power that their voices and their experiences are real.
And you're talking about African-American Jewish relationships and that coalition that's been formed. As a multiracial Jewish community, we dedicated this conference to set strategies for achieving racial justice in America. And last night, we watched a movie and heard Ambassador Andrew Young and Sherry Frank, and you were in the movie as well, speak from Atlanta about revitalizing the African-American Jewish Alliance.
Please hear me, my sisters and brothers, everybody listening to this and connected to this conference. There's no more important moral work than we can be doing right in this moment than defending the right to vote.
JCPA and its member organizations wanted to understand how best to engage in the work of racial justice, especially after all of the events of last summer. To that end, our task force was established and has learned with experts, proposed recommendations for the JCPA board for our own work on racial equity and justice, disseminated guidelines for collaboration, and produced an anti-racism toolkit.
I have found also that bringing the community along in these conversations, you can start doing that really well by outlining what the problems are locally in your community and showing them to people in black and white. You can't really work on any of these issues or contribute on any of these issues unless you're talking to these people that are working on them. And when I say these people, I mean these grassroots organizers and grassroots leaders are overjoyed to work with legacy organizations.
What could racial equity in the Jewish communal in Jewish communal life look like, and how do we get there? And I appreciate that the title focuses on the in Jewish communal life part, because I think that the topic of race and racial justice, topics of Jews of color, topics of how we as an organized Jewish community respond or act and take action in these moments, it often, like, I don't know about my co-panelists here, but I would say that, you know, it's often the conversation feels like it might be an us, them kind of conversation, and not necessarily a we conversation.
it seems like things, are hopeless. But then there are also opportunities such as conversations like this, where I do see potential for change, and I feel inspired and motivated.
So hi, I'm Leslie Dannon Rosenthal. I am a Jcpa board member and I'm a co-chair of the Jcpa task force along with Lois Frank on collaboration with the Black community, which is why I'm in all of those videos. It's also you can follow my pandemic haircuts or lack thereof. At any rate, a year ago, if you look carefully at the beginning of the video, a year ago, we met at the Delegates Assembly last January and adopted a racial justice policy platform to complement our field's local and national efforts to strengthen relationships with Black communities and to demonstrate our commitment to ending systemic racism in America. The video you just saw, which was also a part of our virtual benefit, highlights the work of Jcpa and our Jcrcs and our national member agencies as we came together over the last year. Today, we want to hear how that work is going, especially at the local level and with our national partners. We've invited several Jcrc pros and Yolanda Savage-Narva from the RAC to share with us all their efforts, challenges, and best practices in hopes that this discussion will be helpful to all of our work. Each speaker has 5 minutes to present. We've asked them to prepare PowerPoints that we can share with you later. And I'm going to ask each of our panelists from Jcrcs to identify whether you work within a federation or whether you are independent.
Your speaker is not working. Or use a different speaker. I don't know what.
So with that, I'm going to start out west in Seattle, and let's hear how things are going out there.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. It's really an honor and a pleasure to be here.
Now you screwed me up. Now I'm
share.
totally
Well,
off.
let's see.
Can we mute some? Can we mute everyone?
No.
Everyone, please go on mute.
Okay.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
No worries. So yes, I'm really excited to be here to share with you the work that the Seattle Jcrc has done over the last year, developing our statement, Racial Equity and the Jewish Community. And to the question you just asked, we are an internal Jcrc, internal to our federation. So our colleagues in the community relations field have done an incredible job creating statements and platforms like Jcpa's racial justice platform that we just saw that look at how we approach racial justice in broader society. We determined there was a great need and value in our community to specifically focus on Jews' role in this work.
This is not working.
The role race plays in our internal community dynamics and how our community's history, value, and diversity position us to work toward racial equity. Can you get the next slide, Haya, please? Thank you. Our primary goal in creating this statement was to empower our community members and institutions to engage more deeply in racial equity work and begin to break down what barriers might be holding us back. Early discussions with our Jcrc revealed that one of the biggest barriers to this engagement was not understanding or having the language to articulate where Jews fit into conversations about race. For example, many members of our community struggle with the binary frame of race that we commonly hear in public discourse, because Jewish identity as peoplehood doesn't map neatly onto commonly discussed social identities like race and ethnicity. In order for us to become more effectively engaged in racial equity work, we needed to build awareness around our own identities, examine for ourselves where we fit in racial justice spaces and conversations, develop language around what we call the both and of many of our lived experiences, that many of us may have access to systems of power based on our perceived race, while simultaneously facing the threat of anti-Semitism. And we needed to reflect on our own community's diversity, our history of inclusion or exclusion, and what past and current practices in our institutions may be perpetuating inequity. So our process was, we began, Haya, if you don't mind, could you hit the next slide, please? Thank you. We began with education, providing a number of materials, both live programs and curated lists in various formats for all of our Jcrc members, all of which were also available to the public. We then engaged our Jcrc members in discussions to identify areas of consensus and used those discussions to create the first draft of our statement, which we then circulated to our members and institutions to seek some really substantive feedback. At this stage, we created a small policy team to help work through the feedback we had received, to get through some of the stickiest areas and help us navigate them. And with the help of that team, we created a new draft that we circulated again to our Jcrc members, so they had a number of opportunities to give feedback and really be bought into the process. So at that stage, they were able to submit amendments. The council then met and voted on the suggested amendments, and then following month, they voted to approve the final statement with overwhelming support. It was very exciting. The process took 14 months overall and really would not have been possible without the incredible work of my colleagues, Max Potashnik and Elisa Mossman, and the engagement of the amazing leaders of our Jcrc. So now that our statement has passed, we are putting together a team to implement the action plan in our statement, which really furthers our initial goals. As our Jewish communities become increasingly diverse, we have a lot of work to do in order to create a culture of genuine belonging for everyone in our community. And we want to help empower our community members and institutions to live out their Jewish values, working towards racial justice within our own community and in broader society. Some of the main challenges we experienced, there were many, but I'll say a big one for us is that we are a new Jcrc. Our Jcrc in its current form relaunched in July of 2020, really shortly before we began this consensus statement process. So there was a bit of building the plane while flying it, in that we were getting our structures up and running at the same time as working through an iterative process to create our statement. As political polarization increased, actually, Haya, sorry, can I get the next slide, please? Thank you, sorry about that. As I was saying, political polarization is always increasing. We had to find ways to communicate some really key ideas for this conversation without using language we knew would be triggering and lead us further away from consensus. So how to get into the concepts without using terms like privilege and whiteness. Another delicate line for us to walk was the extent to which anti-Semitism should be included in the statement. While it's a really important component of understanding how the Jewish community interacts with the non-Jewish world, we didn't want articulating issues about anti-Semitism to take away from the primary focus of the statement being about racial equity. While the journey of arriving at the final consensus statement certainly had its ups and downs, the value of the process itself, the learning that took place, the understanding of our own identities and others' perspectives really laid a foundation that is going to help our Jcrc more deeply engage in racial justice work as a Jewish community here in Seattle and Puget Sound. I'm happy to answer questions about our process, approach, or content now or offline, and please feel free to reach out. And yes, the slides will also be shared. I saw that question. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cassie. I think we're going to save question and answer, see if we have time at the end, but thank you very much. Now it's actually my pleasure to call on Linda Scherzer from the Jewish Federation of Greater Metro West New Jersey, my home community, where I have been working closely with Linda as the chair of our anti-racism task force. Linda.
Thank you, Leslie, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm truly honored to be part of this very prestigious panel, and I have to tell you, I am in awe of the work that is going on around the country in our field. Before I ask Haya to put up my PowerPoint presentation, I want to provide a little bit of context, because we are the CRC of the largest Jewish federation in the state of New Jersey. We are an internal CRC, a department of the larger Jewish federation, but I want to be completely transparent that we have not been steeped in this work over the course of many, many years. Like a lot of CRCs with a small staff, but lofty, very outsized aspirational goals, we started to roll up our sleeves and get really engaged in this work only after the murder George Floyd. So while the information that I bring you, the experience that I bring you is not embedded in years and years of work, I'm proud to say that I think, like a lot of CRCs, Jcrcs around the country, that we are truly meeting the moment. We have hired an associate CRC director who is the lead professional in our social justice work, my colleague Sandy Grawert, who is joining me on the call today. And that position actually was partially funded by a donor in our community who is passionate about this work, who believes, like a lot of people in our community, that this is sacred work and really needs to be supported. So hi, I'm going to ask you to put up that slide. Thank you. So we in Greater Metro West, we launched this anti-racism task force in the summer of 2020. This committee is populated by leaders and emerging leaders who come from, span, I think, at least 2 generations. They come bringing different life experiences, different political sensibilities. They come from different geographical areas. They represent different Jewish religious backgrounds, and of course, have different networks that connect them across the greater community. So that's been, I think, a key success of this committee. But what is even more important to the success of what we have been doing was the choice of our chair. And that chair, of course, who identified herself, who was known to all of you as a board member, executive board member of Jcpa, is our beloved Leslie Dannon Rosenthal. And I know that she is kicking me under the table right now, or is about to pull the plug on my microphone. But I have to tell you that when we're doing this work, to have a chair who can truly elevate the importance of what we're doing and can bring gravitas to this work, which is often very charged and very sensitive, as all of us know, is really a gift. And beyond all the intellectual strengths and the warmth and the true sensibilities to this work that Leslie brings, as a former president of our Jewish Federation, she understands the tensions and the dynamics within the community. And she knows what I like to say is the art of the possible. She understands what we can do. She understands the mission of Jewish Federation and what we can and really can't go forward with at this particular time. So more about Leslie a little bit later when I talk specifically to one of the issues that we have been working on. Before I switch to the next slide, I just want to highlight 2 of the initiatives that we were involved with over the last year and a half. One of them is our Black Jewish Teen Dialogue series, which has been virtual. It's brought together an equal number of teens, Jewish teens from our catchment area, along with high school students of color from Newark, who've come together to talk about issues of racism and anti-Semitism. This program is going to culminate in us taking this group to Washington for 2 days. They'll go to the Museum of African American History. They'll visit the Holocaust Museum. We'll take them to Capitol Hill. We had hoped to take them on a civil rights journey to the South. COVID got in the way of that, so we're scaling back that program. But this has been a really, really important initiative that we know is going to bear fruit in over the years to come. And then I wanted also to share with you that as I speak, there are 30 members of our community, men and women, who are currently being vetted as Big Brothers and Big Sisters by the Big Brothers Big Sisters organization in Newark, with whom we're partnering. So, which I think is just a tremendous thing to happen. I believe that the benefits to our community, to the mentors, will be maybe not as significant, but certainly significant as they are going to be to the young people in Newark who are going to become their mentees. Now to the advocacy issue, which, well, we've talked about a bunch of advocacy issues, and I'm going to get to that in a couple of slides, but Chai, I'm going to ask you to go to the next one, please. Chai, next slide, if you can. Okay, our racial justice goals. So we articulated it in plain and simple language. And you're going to see it come up in our next slide as well. Our racial justice goals is what we call our D in terms of our success equation. Obligated by the Jewish value of B'Tselem Elohim, all humans are created in the image of God. Jewish Federation of Greater Metro West strives to be an anti-racist organization. In the next slide, you will see what that success equation looks like. I know the print is small, it's going to be sent out. You will see the A, B, and C, the kind of performance measures that all add up to what we hope will become that D, fulfilling what we believe to be the definition of success, but it involves education, it involves outreach, joining those coalitions and finding the advocacy issues that we can get around, to get behind, to build support for. Again, we're going to send that out to you so you can really drill down and see what that looks like. This success equation, by the way, is what defines all of the important initiatives that we undertake in Greater Metro West, and every department needs to create one. Next slide, please. So I'm going to speak anecdotally to the one issue that I hope is what you take away from this, because we have been focused over the last several months on the issue of reparations. In the state of New Jersey, there was a piece of legislation that would establish a bill, a New Jersey Reparations Task Force, just to explore the idea of what reparations could look like for African Americans in this state. This involved weeks of discussion and debate within our community. We brought the executive director of the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice to come twice to explain what this would look like and explore the history of racism and slavery in the state of New Jersey. After months of discussion among the members of the Anti-Racism Task Force, we brought this issue directly to our CRC steering committee with the hopes of getting clarity and guidance about whether to bring it to our Board of Trustees. And we in the end, we brought this to leadership. It was decided that this was still an issue that was in the early stages, that still was very charged. Here again is where Leslie helped to guide us in terms of what we decided for now would be the work ahead, or the outcome, if you will. And I'll ask Haya to go to our last slide, which is, okay, so what now? How do we get buy-in from the community? What is the roadmap for success as we move forward? Recognizing the tensions that exist in every community and certainly in ours. Understanding that that education, there's nothing short of education to be able to, explain to people what this is about. Reparations means one thing to most of the Jewish community, or to large segments of our community. What does it mean to use that word when applied to another community that went through the trauma of the African American community? So we have decided that we're going to start on a grassroots level to socialize this issue, to enlist the social action committees of our synagogues, to bring this issue into the synagogues, and again, to work on a grassroots level, to consistently do the outreach that's needed to our friends in the African American community, to inform again our partner at the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice what the outcome is, what it is exactly that we're going to do to try and move this forward, and to continue to find issues to work in common cause. The words that I would leave you with are slow and steady. The road ahead of us, as we know, is long and very hard. We understand that we are not obligated to complete the journey nor finish the task, but neither are we free to abandon it. I would add that our community, particularly our younger generation, but not only our 30 and 40-year-olds, are gently demanding this of us and we of ourselves. So with that, I'm going to throw this back to Leslie for our next speaker, and thank you all for your attention.
Linda, it's really a joy to work with you. Karen, let's hear from you.
Thanks, Leslie. And just also want to reiterate what Linda said about just the honor of being part of a group of people doing amazing work around the country. To all my Jcrc colleagues, kudos, kol hakavod, and really pleased to be on this panel. Thanks for inviting me. So I'm Karen Elam. I direct an initiative called the Levine Center to End Hate at the Jewish Federation of Greater Rochester in New York. I did start out as a Jcrc director in 2016, and we do have a Jcrc. The Levine Center to End Hate is a separate entity, though of course there's a lot of overlap, et cetera. And I'm delighted to say that we have a brand new Jcrc director as of 3 weeks ago, Monica Gabel, who's on this call. So welcome to our crazy club, Monica. So what I want to do is I'm going to see, believe I can share my screen. Yep. So give me just a moment and let me know if you can see my slides. Just a thumbs up from good. Thanks, Haya. Okay, so I just want to quickly go over what our story is with the Levine Center to End Hate, because it is, like I said, a slightly different animal in this sphere. So we were really, we grew out of what happened in Charlottesville, which, as a side note, happens to be my alma mater, my husband's alma mater. So, and no less, we were in Israel. I was in Israel with a group of young people when this took place. So it just all sort of felt like they were slinging things directly at me. But out of that, as we well know, out of this Unite the Right rally, we saw hate, polarization, violence increasing. And so we have the good fortune of Family Foundation here locally that approached us and said, we want to see something done about this. It's hard to believe there are neo-Nazis marching in the town in the United States at this point. So we were given opportunity to create this thing that became the Levine Center to End Hate. One of the very first things that we did was put together a very diverse steering committee, very intentional about who we invited, multicultural, multi-ethnic, multi-religious, from all different sectors, business, nonprofit, higher ed, the arts, et cetera. We have our two co-chairs this year and last year, Carolyn Nussbaum, former president of the Federation, an attorney, and Kevin Beckford, who is in the business sector, does a lot of DEI work, by the way, I have to just mention, the first town council member in Pittsburgh, which is a local suburb, first one of color in 250 years. So pretty remarkable guy. Then we decided, of course, we need a mission statement. So the Levine Center to End Hate seeks to unite the greater Rochester community in overcoming hate through education, dialogue, and positive action. Our three pillars: education, dialogue, and positive action, which really organize all of our work. And I will say that we were able to do all these three things pre-COVID. Really, we have focused mostly on education, tried to do a little bit of dialogue groups online. It wasn't so successful. So like everybody else, we are really waiting for the day when we can all be together again. What we did was decide really our work needed to be centered in two ways: community engagement and youth engagement. So in the community engagement sphere, we actually had an initial event I don't have on here that brought together a former white supremacist and a member of the Sikh community from Wisconsin, whose father was killed in a shooting. The former white supremacist had been one of the organizers of the group, out of which came the killer. And they have formed a bond and were really amazing speakers. They started us off in the fall of 2019. And from there, our programming has just continued. Brave Spaces is a summit to end hate that we created, did our first one in the fall of 20, second one this past fall. Had Eric Ward, which I know many of you are familiar with, really phenomenal speaker, really phenomenal way to get our summit off the ground. Had well over 500 people online. Unfortunately, it was online. And out of that grew an event or a program I'm particularly proud of, A Tale of Two Cities, redlining and racist policies in Rochester, New York. Because for us, so much of what we're doing, we want to really center here locally. And each of these speakers, Simeon Bannister with our community foundation, and this young man, Shane Wiegand, who is a teacher who has taken it upon himself to educate himself about redlining. They had each done their own presentations. We combined them, worked with TEDx Rochester to do this. And had well over 800 people attend, with comments coming through the chat like, I've been here my whole life and I didn't know this. So needless to say, I'm sure a lot of people relate to this. We are a community that is very segregated, and the city is predominantly people of color and the predominantly white community, including the white Jewish community in the suburbs. So there's a big disconnect, and that's something that we are really intentional about working on. Then the other thing was Asian Matters, another program created when we saw the spike in anti-Asian hate. We also invited Oren Jacobson from Project Shema to lead a session on the, again, spike of anti-Semitism. And then our Brave Spaces that just took place this past fall, we had Juju Chang as both an Asian American and a Jewish woman speaking about the unfortunate attacks in both members of both communities, and Chris Mosier, who's a transgender athlete, closing us out. I want to get to this slide. I'm talking fast because this is where I want to spend a little bit more time. Youth. This is youth engagement was the other bucket or other area that we have been focusing on. And while I was very happy with what we were able to do prior to hiring a person dedicated to our youth engagement work, which is some of what you see here, and I won't go into a lot of detail. What we have now been able to do, as I said, is hire somebody since August, Thomas Kyler, a young man who has been doing youth engagement work, as he says, since he was 14 years old, from Rochester, New York, educated in the school systems in Rochester, New York, attended Nazareth College here locally, and has been doing an incredible job of building our youth engagement work. So we were able to hire him because the funder was pleased with the work we were doing, but said, let's do more. And so I want to talk for just a minute about these two areas, and then I will close this out. One is corporate partnerships. So we definitely recognize that we need to be engaging with the corporate community here. Again, as I said before, when we look at that Tale of Two Cities program, when we recognize the redlining, the lack of opportunity, Kodak and Xerox were behemoths here in Rochester, and very unfortunately notoriously known for not hiring Black and workers of color. And so there's a lot that needs to be addressed, and we really want to be doing that with business leaders. So we are putting together a corporate council to really advise us very specifically in that realm, and there'll be obviously connection to our steering committee. And then we've got this youth engagement piece, which I am especially excited about, where we are aiming to develop a cadre of young leaders from across Rochester that will connect in learning and action to create programming for their school and home communities to address racism, anti-Semitism, and other forms of hate. So what I'm really excited to tell you today is that we have formed a Youth Ambassador Council. Thomas really has done amazing work recruiting these young people. We had our orientation with them on Sunday. We have 8 youth ambassadors. And what I'm most excited about is that they are pretty much as diverse as you can get with a group of 8 people. We have equal parts young men and young women. They are diverse racially, religiously, sexual orientation, and in some ways for me, almost more important, geographically. So we have young people from city schools, we have young people from suburban schools. This is a big deal here because our city schools are, unfortunately very under-resourced, and our suburban schools are not. And so there is a lot of separation, division, and frankly, racist policy undergirding all of that. So I am excited about these young people coming together. Being in the room with them on Sunday was remarkable. Within no time, they were already engaging conversations with each other about what is it like for you to be in a suburban school? What is it like for you to be in an urban school, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm really looking forward to what we can do with this. And then just want to say more information on our website and haterock.org. And, obviously, if there's time for questions, more than happy to answer them. Thanks.
Karen, thank you so much. So many questions to ask. Now I want to turn to Rabbi Asher in Detroit and hear what's happening there.
Hey, thank you so much, Leslie. Wow, this is so inspiring. It's incredible the work everyone is doing. And I'm excited. We have a video that I think, hi up, there we go. Okay. and then I'll comment on it.
We are so excited. This is an incredible program that we're having here. We're working with a wonderful organization, Philos. We work with our Coalition for Black and Jewish Unity, which we co-convene with the Urban League, the ADL, and the Council of Baptist Pastors of Detroit and vicinity.
We are on site in the beautiful city of Detroit, Michigan. So happy to be here worshiping and fellowshipping with our Jewish brothers and sisters and others as we are on the 8th day, the 8th stop on our tour, Shine a Light Against Anti-Semitism, Racism, and all forms of hatred and bigotry.
This is all part of our Shine a Light campaign that we're partnering with Jewish organizations, Christian organizations, African-American organizations, Hispanic organizations to raise awareness about the problem of anti-Semitism and racism. And one of the things that we've done is to be in 8 cities in 8 days. We started in DC with New York, Miami, Atlanta, Dallas, LA, Cleveland, and now Detroit.
I am here today as a proud supporter of the great state of Israel and my Jewish brothers and sisters, but I also am here to stand to support my African American brothers and sisters to let everyone know that we will continue to fight against intolerance and injustice in the world, that we will march on until victory is won.
We ourselves can be a light. We can bring kindness and goodness and peace and nurture and care into our homes, into our communities, and give both to ourselves and our families, but also to the greater community.
It's so important that the Black and Jewish communities stand up for one another, that we fight racism and anti-Semitism together. I'm delighted to be here and to meet so many people from Greater New Mount Moriah Baptist Church and to hear the speakers that we've heard today. Thank you so very much.
I was a member of the Detroit Roundtable of Protestants, Catholics, and Jews, and I had active membership. We would meet at the different churches that are represented by the group. I really always enjoyed the intermingling of different faiths.
It's great to be here to stand with our Jewish brothers and sisters. Great to be here to meet new people, meet new faces. Thank you so much for standing with us.
Hey, thank you so much. I'm glad that worked. So I'm the executive director of the Jcrc AJC, and all those letters are staying, so we're not going away. We're an independent 501c3, but we are an agency of the Federation of Metropolitan Detroit. That's our Jcrc side. And we're also the regional office of the AJC, of the American Jewish Committee. And when I know this film lasted 3 minutes, so I have 2 minutes. I wanted to emphasize the idea of that film and the idea of that celebration happened to be on the 8th day of Hanukkah, is to emphasize that the Black community and the Jewish community, we are partners now. I think that there was a sense that all the things that we can do to advocate for things that the African American community needs, and those are very important: criminal justice reform, voting. We all need criminal justice, and we all need voting rights. But the bigger picture is that I think there's a sense in the Jewish community now that we need our African American brothers and sisters. We need them. We are partners. The way Jenny Lewis mentioned, we have to be in this together. So we have a coalition for Black and Jewish unity, which we've added the Urban League to. We also have their co-conveners, the Urban League of Detroit, the ADL, and the Council of Baptist Pastors of Detroit and vicinity. We also established a caucus, a Black Jewish Unity Legislative Caucus in the Michigan legislature that is sort of a template for doing more, for advocating for more. You saw there Shira Solomon. Shira Solomon happens to be, she's on our staff as community associate, but she happens to be a Jew of color. And so not only does she happens to have the portfolio of working with the Coalition for Black and Jewish Unity, but also for DEI issues and focusing on the Jewish community itself and our inclusion. Fascinating thing, when I spoke to when I engaged with the pastors, the Christian pastors we work with, it's not so clear that Jews of color are a simple bridge to the Black community because they are Jews. And we're working mostly with the Christian Black community. So everyone loves each other and everyone really, we're partners, but they're distinct things, working as partners with the African-American Christian community and also inward facing DEI. I just wanted to mention that we not only, when the George Floyd murder occurred, we right away just focused on racism. We didn't talk about anti-Semitism. But when the tension occurred in Israel, when there was a conflict, Israel and Gaza, our African-American partners, our coalition wrote a very strong letter defending the state of Israel in its war against Hamas. So they were there for us. We want to be there for them. And I'll just mention that there's a socializing that Karen mentioned before, bringing the communities together, like that event that we did with Philos. Philos is a Christian organization, but they're amazing, and I should say, they are amazing in bringing the African-American community together with the Jewish community. We had a great MLK program where I spoke in church and again said to our African-American fellow congregants that we need you. The Jewish community, you might think we're so strong and powerful, but we are vulnerable also. So we need you as well. We had a Freedom Seder, we have Bible study, and basically the same message is there. We are not, it's not the Jews going to help out the African Americans. It's not, what have you done for us? It's, we are partners, we are friends. And this is rewarding, as I think all of us, and from what I've heard, this is rewarding positive work. And so just really, it's amazing that JCPA is having this panel, and I'm so inspired by all my, whatever is happening. It's incredible. You read the news, things sound really scary. You hear this panel, there's hope. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. That's so great. Really, thank you. It is wonderful doing this work. Yolanda, tell us what's happening at the RAC.
So first, and I know we're probably getting close to time, but I just have to say thank you for convening this group. Thank you for everyone who has spoken and provided updates on what they're working on before. Rabbi Asher, I think you're right. You listen to the news and you kind of think about what's going on, and it kind of pulls you down, but to listen to all of the things that are going on across the country actually inspires hope, and it keeps me going. So thank you all for sharing that. So I'm Yolanda Savage Narva. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Director of Racial Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion on Pamunkey, Piscataway, and Anacostan tribal land in Washington, D.C. And I want to briefly speak to you today about this idea of creating this community of belonging. I'm thinking about this idea of using this mirrors and windows approach as the foundation of that learning. And so when I talk about creating a community of belonging, that simply means that is really the way that we are going to address oppression, racial equity, and all forms of oppression, and really looking to seeking equity and justice for all people. And so on the next slide, I dive in and talk a little bit more about the mirrors and windows work. And so I bet some of you are like, what is this mirrors and windows work? And so basically, it's a journey that we are all on together. So the mirrors work is really our internal work that we have to do. And that internal work is really that introspection piece that's important for us to continue to build the stamina to do this work. It's a harder place to be because it's actually thinking about holding a mirror up and saying, okay, these are the things that I know, the seeds that have been planted in me that gives me the implicit and explicit biases that I sometimes portray, working on those pieces. It holds the mirror up to say, okay, in order for me to really dive deeply into this work, I need to be vulnerable. I need to be transparent. And it's also helping us push past the binary of good and bad. If I'm, a good person, then everything is external to me. And, I'm a bad person. That means I'm grappling with these things and wrestling with these things when the opposite is actually true. throwing that binary out of the window and understanding that this is a process, and the mirrors piece is one piece of that process. The second piece, of course, is the window. And a lot of that has been described today, this kind of collective action, this external work that we have to do in addition to doing that internal work, supporting civil rights legislation, making sure that we're connecting with different groups to make sure we're having dialogue and conversations and really building the community that we need to build, being proximate to one another and working on these things together. And so the foundation of this work is really this mirrors and windows and balancing this out throughout our journey towards racial equity and justice. And so really briefly, I won't linger here long, but this is the foundation of the Religious Action Center's Racial Justice Campaign. And so it's divided into 3 pillars. We focus on racial equity, diversity, and inclusion, which is really basically what I described, that mirrors piece that really helps us to kind of do the internal work, whether it's the internal work that we're doing for ourselves or the internal work that we're doing in our specific community. And then, of course, Barbara Weinstein described our federal advocacy work, our campaigns that we work on, and then our state advocacy campaigns as well. We have 9 RAC states that work on very specific state legislation. And so this is an example of something that we're trying to focus on and the need to bring in the mirrors and windows pieces. Some examples specifically around the racial equity, diversity, and inclusion work that we've been doing includes offering congregational assessments to our congregations where they can actually take a look at their congregation, the finances, the all pieces of the congregation, and look at where they can really place DEI efforts into what they're doing. We have many what we call ready one-on-one trainings that we offer to our congregants, to our external partners, to any of you interested in participating in those. We do work specifically with our clergy. We're starting a clergy series in probably the next few weeks. We're working on fine-tuning the date. And then the URJ and the RAC are doing a lot of internal work as well. We're doing a lot of work with managers, with all levels of our staff to really integrate the Ready work into everything that we do. And on the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about what it takes to build that platform for racial justice and equity, how we really create that community of belonging. And I saw this slide recently, this picture, and I added it to this slide because it's a really good image about what it takes to build the foundation for racial equity and justice. And if you look at this picture, none of this is put together yet, right? So nothing has already been formed, nothing has already been created. And so it really allows people from different backgrounds to co-create what this looks like. And that's really the first step in building the platform for racial justice and equity. I'd love to share a quote with you really quickly from Isabel Wilkinson's book called Caste, and it talks about the structure of a house, and it says, like other old houses, America has an unseen skeleton, its caste system, that is as central to its operation as are the studs and joists that we cannot see in the physical buildings that we call home. Caste is that infrastructure of our divisions. It is the architecture of human hierarchy, the subconscious code of instructions for maintaining, in our case, a 400-year-old social order. And so for us to really impact racial equity and justice, we have to start here and co-create and build that platform together. And so when we set goals for racial justice, there are a couple of things that we want to keep in mind. One of the first things we want to do after we think about framing everything in this mirrors and windows space is building the language that we need in order to actually move forward. The language that we're going to be able to use together and understand and build awareness around that language. We have to continue to develop deep dialogue and be in community with one another and proximity to one another. And then we need to look at how this actually shows up over time. Are we measuring the impact of what we're doing? Are our efforts really showing up in a way where we can look and actually see where we're moving the needle on certain things that we have set out to do? Buy-in is really important. Messaging, building the individual relationships that we need to build, and making sure that we know that this is a journey. We have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable in order to have the conversations that we're going to have. Some of the challenges, and we can switch to the next slide, please, Haya. We will have challenges as we continue to move through this journey together, and we have to learn how to navigate those challenges. We have to understand that people are human and that they're showing up with the lived experiences that they have. They're showing up with trauma that they've been carrying with them, and that we'll have to be able to unpack and have conversations around that, because ultimately what we are trying to do is imagine our world anew. And we have to be at a point thinking about Martin Luther King Jr.'s famous quote about bending the arc of moral justice, that we're going to have to do more than just let it bend in the wind. We'll have to push it and pull it, and we'll have to do that together and have the stamina to keep moving. So that is a brief run through of thinking about building that racial justice and equity platform, and I look forward to being in conversation with you all at a later time. Thank you. Thank you for the time.
Yolanda, thank you so much. I think that what you said about getting comfortable with being uncomfortable has been so true about the work that we're doing at JCPA and in our local communities. So I want to shift for our panelists. Since you guys are all out there in the communities, within the Jewish community and in the larger community, Karen actually touched on it, and I'd actually like Karen to respond first to this question. How are you handling difficult reactions in the public square? Things like anti-Zionism, things like speakers that get brought to our communities and there's pushback. So Karen, if you would start, we only have a few minutes. I hope I can get to everybody, but and again, thank you to all our panelists. You are all doing really the holy work of our hands. Thank you so much. So Karen, if you could start, that would be great.
Sure. Thanks, Leslie. And you know what, I'm going to take 30 seconds to say, I can't get the words out. It was so incredibly difficult. And I know it was the case for, I think, everybody when, the Gaza war erupted and all of a sudden people that we thought were allies backed away from being allies. People that, were not allies were ready to jump on us. And so we at the Levine Center, like our work separate from the Jcrc, and we've tried our best to kind of create that firewall. We've always said we're not taking up Israel. It's a very, very locally focused initiative, but we got pulled into the melee and the stuff that went around on social media criticizing the Levine Center, me, our federation, and I know everybody went through this. And the truth is, I think we need to do a lot of work to prepare ourselves, because I think something will happen again and we will be caught in that situation again. It's the ongoing work of the relationship building, like that wonderful video that Asher showed. But there is also some stuff that there's some disconnects happening for sure. And it's not just Israel, it's with anti-Semitism. I know a lot of my colleagues also feel like there's radio silence when these attacks are happening. So I did more than 30 seconds, but I don't have good answers. We're struggling, and I'm delighted that Monica is joining us, because Monica, as a volunteer, as a individual before she was hired, was doing a lot of work to address the backlash that we saw in May. So it's really going to have to be a collective. I'll stop there.
No, that's okay. Thank you. Anybody else want to? Linda.
Thanks, Leslie. I just wanted to refer to what happened just a little over a week ago, and this event that that really obviously captivated us for 11 hours, and all of us are dealing now with the aftermath of that event in Colleyville, and refer to what I've heard from more than one rabbi in our community. In fact, the rabbi of a major synagogue, Reform synagogue in one of our communities, which is that after what happened, he didn't hear from very many people. This is a man who has been deeply engaged in interfaith work. He has been the president of a state interfaith council, and much to his chagrin, he just heard from too few people. Now, that could have been because it happened in a faraway place. It didn't happen in the state of New Jersey, and I would expect that things would be different, had, God forbid, it happened in any one of our communities. But I think that it's at moments like these, as we have the field on a call like this, where we kind of put a fine point and remind ourselves and our communities what it is that we do in the field of community relations building, because a lot of people in my community don't really understand the title. We engage in government relations and public policy, but we're not the government relations wing of our federation. We do Israel advocacy work and teach our young people how to confront anti-Semitism and toxic anti-Israel activity on college campuses, but we're not the Israel advocacy wing of federation. And we engage in social justice and fight for racial equality, but we're not the social justice wing. And that, whoever named us did so with great foresight, because community relations really transcends everything that we do. And it needs to be ramped up, and it needs to be pursued in every sector, in every way that we can, to fulfill our mission as Jews and as communal professionals. So I just wanted to.
Thank you, Linda. Rabbi.
Yeah, it's interesting. We did actually feel the NAACP, the local NAACP, reached out to us right away. Reverend Wendell Anthony and our African-American partners were great. Our Muslim partners reached out to us, our Hindu partners. But one thing I would say that's interesting, I think we have to push more and not give up. We had a few months ago a rally just after the conflict against anti-Semitism within the Jewish community, different organizations. And some of the organizations pushed that we shouldn't sing Hatikva because it's not about Israel, it's just about anti-Semitism. So we didn't. And then I was a little torn. This last Sunday MLK weekend at the church, the Greater New Mount Moriah Church, which we did a program with our Coalition for Black and Jewish Unity for MLK, the African-American members sang Lift Every Voice. And we sang right after that Hatikva, and it was beautiful, and it was well received, and it was powerful. Now, I'm not saying that everyone is pro-Israel and all that, but I think that sometimes we need to be stronger and say that no, we need something, we need some reaction, even from our Muslim partners. If we can't agree on narrative in the Middle East, we have to push for some kind of reaction. So we'll see, but I don't want to give up on that we are, again, partners, and that we have to be sensitive to what is the African-American sensitivities and racism. And when it's time to concentrate on their needs, we have to be there. But sometimes we have our needs, and we can expect our friends to be there for us.
I would just add very quickly that I think we all of us on this Zoom know that we don't do this for any transactional reasons. We don't do it because we expect them to be there for us when there's, God forbid, a hostage taking at a synagogue, or when hostilities break out between Israel and Hamas. I mean, we're not doing it for those reasons. We do it because this is who we are, and this presses on our Jewish values, and this is wired into our Jewish DNA, and we do it for all the right reasons. But I will admit to you, and I'm gratified to hear that these different organizations and people and ethnic groups and religious groups reached out to you, Asher, but not enough of them are. in other places. And we can't help but notice, but we move forward anyway and continue to do what we know to be the right thing.
Yolanda, I thought you had something to say.
Yes, Leslie, really quickly, because I know time is running out. I mean, as a person who has intersecting identities, as a Black Jewish woman, the one thing that I just want to say is that this is extremely complicated, and that everyone is thinking from their trauma, and it's a trauma response often to some of the things that happen. Silence is also a trauma response that we are seeing, and so we have to think about that, and we have to just continue, as Rabbi Asher said, to push forward and communicate and dialogue. And we're going to have some uncomfortable conversations, but I think that we're on the right path, and we just have to keep pushing forward.
Right. I think that the lesson of getting comfortable with being uncomfortable is key to this work. And I really want to thank all of the panelists for your work. Cassie, did you have anything you wanted to add before I close us out? You guys are such at the beginning of your journey. I don't want to put too much, you're doing wonderful stuff. I don't want to put too much weight on you.
That's okay. Thank you. I really appreciated what all of the panelists had to say, and, really think for us, as you said, sort of earlier in our journey as a Jcrc, what's really important is for us to be showing up in other communities and doing work that is important beyond our own community. And that's the only way we really need to be present in that way. And if we want anything to change.
Well, thank you all so much. Thank all of you for being here today. Thank you for the work that you are doing, whether you are one of our outstanding professionals, our dedicated volunteers. We thank you so much for everything you're doing. JCPA is here for you, and we are looking forward to seeing all of you at our JCPA virtual conference, April 11th through 12th. Thank you all so very much for being here today. See you in April.